Welcome to this first session where we're going to have a conversation around the procurement cycle. This is really a key piece of theory that students have to learn as part of their studies. And we talk about procurement being a circular process where right the way from starting with identification of need, right the way through sourcing and putting it back into contract management before at the end then having to review the next stages. With me today I've got two colleagues. I've got Sue Rashid, Director of SRSCC Limited, and also Greg Jackson, who is Director of SRSCC. Would you like to both give yourself a little bit of an introduction to everybody and give a bit an indication about your background so that we can put some context around the discussion?
Okay, so thank you, Alison. I'm really pleased to be here today. So my name's Sue Rashid. Yes, I am the Director of SR Supply Chain Consultants. My background is mainly automotive, so lots of practical experience in terms of supply chain and procurement and supply chain management in an automotive, but worked in other sectors, FMCG as well. Really excited to talk about this subject, and it's quite interesting in the context of a training company too.
Thank you. So, Greg.
Hi, yeah, I'm the Director of Training at SRSCC. So my background is I spent some time in the public sector. I've worked in the building industry and then moved into fast-moving consumer goods and retail and wholesale, mainly in the food markets, where I before moving into the world of education was a commodities trader. So yeah, that's my rich and wonderful tapestry.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Allison Simpson. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm one of the course tutors with SRSCC. I've been with SRSCC on and off for about 10 years around it, but before coming to work permanently with them from January. My background is I've worked in both public and private sectors, from being head of procurement right the way down to category management and sourcing specialist. So between us, I think we've got quite a wealth of information that hopefully we can bring some elements together for students or anybody watching this. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you at the moment. I'm going to just share a PowerPoint presentation with you just to outline the overview about what we're going to look at today and give some context around it. So we've done the welcome and introductions. The next stage I'm going to do is really just focus in and give an overview about what the purchasing or procurement cycle is. And then we're going to have a discussion between the three of us really about how it works in practice and how students remember this and how we maybe help you understand a little bit more about it, and then we'll summarise it later. This is a very high level view of a cycle of procurement activities, starting off with the planning stages, so where you're looking at it and trying to identify what's actually needed, what your options are, how we get ready to go into the procurement process. It might be triggered by a conversation in the corridor or even something more formal like a purchase requisition coming through on a system. But in this element, we then move into the defining of requirements. So we start to pull together our needs and consider what options we've got about being able to deliver to the supply market and what can they do for us? How can we identify the best approach before we select what we're going to do in the sourcing model? Now, in terms of sourcing, we're not only just talking about tendering. This could be a request for quotations. It could be even commencing a negotiation process around what you need to do. And in this instance, we're really going to then have to try and communicate whatever those requirements were to the supply market. Hopefully we do it successfully, and from there on they're able to put back their bids or their pricing or the negotiation meeting happens, and from there on we're able to award the contract out to the most suitable element. Once the contract's been awarded, we're maybe then moving into making sure it continually delivers what we need it to deliver. So we move into the stage of contract management, making sure everything comes exactly what we want. It hasn't been a good process if it doesn't deliver at this stage. So this is a key cycle. Now there's no timeline on these elements, so they can be different depending on the different types of contracts that you have. But at some stage, something's going to come to an end. The relationship with your suppliers or the contract's going to end. And from there on, you need to really look at what you've done in the past and identify what you're going to do in the future. So once we've done this, we can then start identifying and going back around the cycle again. This isn't the only version of the procurement cycle that we come across. On this screen, I've got two versions. The one in the blue on the right-hand side is the SIPS, Standard Procurement and Supply Cycle. It breaks down those basic steps into 13 key elements of activities that need to do. They don't say that you have to follow every one in exact amount of time, the same for each definition. It depends on the procurement activity that you need to do, but it's very detailed. On the left hand side of the screen, I have a much more generic type of procurement cycle. Again, it picks out the key activities that are going to happen. So if you start to do some research about procurement cycles, you may see different variations of it. They don't have to be the same. There isn't only one version of it. The key point is take a bit with an open mind when you're looking at some of these. Look at what they're actually trying to tell you, what the key steps are in each of them. I'm going to move back now over to Greg and Sue and take their opinion on the different areas. Greg, Sue, how do you use the purchasing cycle, or how do you explain to your students about what this circular flow of procurement is? Sue, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so from my perspective, I always talk about, I like to use the more generic version, starting off with identifying the needs, because it's simpler in the steps. The way I would ask learners to learn it would be by thinking about a clock, is to learn the theory side of it and learn the order of it. I like to stress that no element is more important than any other. I think it depends on what you're procuring, depends on the length of time that you stay in each stage. I think it really does depend on the importance and the risk associated with it. It's really, really important that we do consider, even if we don't spend a lot of time in any of the stages, that we consider each of the elements. And, I think if you get it right at the early stages, the later stages you will find that will work a lot more smoothly, and your due diligence is done and there's less risk.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Greg, from your perspective.
Yeah, so for me, the procurement cycle is everything that we're going to do in procurement, and I think it can be a really daunting thing for students to try and get that concept. And realistically, if we think about the procurement cycle, it's everything we're going to do and everything that we might have done in the past and everything we're going to do in the future. So we have to try and consolidate that down into stages that we can actually remember it. Yeah. So in the real world and the practical application, let's put that to the side for a second and let's think about learning it for an exam. So when we think about each of those stages are going to have some of the key aspects that go into there. An examiner isn't going to ask you to write a 3, 4, 5 page essay on each of those stages, and we probably could when we think about each of those stages. Just even something like awarding a contract, there's best practice, there's all different standards we might adhere to, public and private. We're not going to be able to do that, so we're going to pick out a few key areas for each one that we're going to talk about. So if we think about something like identifying a need, well, how is a need identified? Who identifies the need? And these key concepts are what we're going to probably be able to replicate in an exam. So that's for an exam that's stage 1, think about it in keywords or key little activities that are going to happen at each stage. The second thing I would say is make it real, make it practical. Think about a procurement that's maybe familiar to you, something that you buy already. We have loads of students who are new to procurement, who may not have the experience and the knowledge, and the procurement cycle is going to be in every level of any qualification that you do, from level 2 to level 6. So particularly those students at level 2 and level 3, they might be new, they might be straight out of school, they might be new to a commercial role. It's going to be really difficult for them to try and find practical application. So utilize the organization, utilize the people within your organization. Ask to go through the process with someone. Have these questions written out, right? Who identified it? How's it identified? Go through it practically. The best way to remember anything is to put some kind of context to it. So for me, the procurement cycle, it can be quite daunting. There's lots of stages. And the final thing I would say is choose one. Pick one procurement cycle. As Alison alluded to at the start, there are generic procurement cycles. I actually quite like your procurement cycle that you've created at the start there. I think it's actually more thorough than some and not as complicated as others. So I quite like that. I might be stealing that. But choose one, because it's very easy to get confused and chop and change and move, and then you're duplicating stages or you're missing stages. So try and pick out one, and that's going to be your journey. I certainly think that when we look at the SIPS qualifications, which is what we're really focusing on, and how to pass an exam for that, you've got lots of different references. If you, depending on which text you read, you might be looking at the SIPS, you might be looking at the generic. But pick out one as your main one, because the SIPS examiner will ask you for the key stages of a procurement cycle. I would be very surprised if they asked you for something specific to a license and Farrington or a SIPS procurement cycle. Or I would pick out one that you're comfortable with and feel confident in that.
Can I just put something in here? I think one of the problems particularly learners experience is when they're first taught about the procurement cycle, is they might automatically assume that they should be doing each and every aspect of it, and quite a lot of learners, in my experience, only do parts of it or key elements of it. And that's where your point there is going to speak to other colleagues or different departments and get a wider understanding of it is really, really important for them, because if they can actually see it and walk through that whole process, it helps with the remembering and the understanding, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's funny, actually. You often see this. The students who come in with less experience and less knowledge are those that are usually more open to researching and challenging their understanding and doing things. One thing I'd say to all students, if you're coming in and you've got 30 years experience, you might not have 30 years experience in every stage of that. So it's like you say, Sue, you need to go and look at what other people are doing and not make assumptions. Find out what it's about, how it works, and that's how you're going to improve. We say this, like the amazing thing about doing any kind of course or something external to your business is about finding out what you don't know, because we all think we know everything, and then it's only by looking at going to a course, other things, of thinking about questioning why we do things the way we do things, and getting those new kind of concepts that we can try and apply or try and learn. Sorry.
You don't know what you don't know, which is really, really important there, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd like to just pick up on a point that Greg and you both have mentioned, really, about putting the procurement cycle into context, looking for examples in each of the different stages around it. I always find when I'm working on this area with students that giving them some practical guidance about what would happen in each stage might not happen for every procurement. I take that point on board, but helps them then start to understand that even if, Sue, you said, if they don't get involved in every step of it, they can see where their role links together. So what good bits of examples and context have you been able to share with students about this procurement cycle? If I can pick up on one, Sue, that you mentioned, because it's a point I always make, is around identification of need, you know, that understanding what you want. If you put the time and effort into that stage, you generally find that the procurement activity all the way through the rest of the stages is much easier.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if we're starting at, you know, identifying the needs, I always like to give learners examples. One of the classic ones I've always done in class is ask them to design a playground. Yeah. For a certain age group. And it really makes them think about the different types of requirements, whether it be health and safety, you know, what they're trying, the innovation they're trying to get out of the playground, what they're trying to achieve, what budget they're working with. But then also, I might also say, right, I want you also go and buy a desk for the office. Yeah. And it's very, very simple, very simple, and it's easily applied. And then work them through each stage and think, right, okay, the next stage, how are you going to buy it? Are you going to go out to auction? You know, are you going to go and award it direct? Do you already know the supplier? And take them through. And I think if you've got two good examples to walk through, and it's sometimes nice getting them to think about it in groups, it really makes them think and apply it from their own perspective. Yeah.
I think it's really important what you say there. It's about, I'm just going back to what Alison said about preparation, and it was like Deming that said you should spend 80% of your time planning and then 20% of your time fixing problems or solving or resolving issues. And when we think about the first few stages of that procurement cycle, when we think about that idea of identifying the need, getting it right in the first place, one of the things that people don't do is engage with their stakeholders. And like when we think about engaging with stakeholders, one real practical thing that I think that the problems that you have is because you didn't ask enough questions to the right people. So often when we think about buying something, whether it be a park or a school desk, or, you know, I used to buy lots of food products. The thing that I would think is, well, what does my customer want? What does the end user want? Right. Oh, well, they want this and they want that. Great. I'm going to go and find it. And then what would happen would be the product would come in and the warehouse would say, oh, we can't take that. It doesn't have the correct label on it. Or we're not going to be able to put that. We haven't got space in the warehouse for these types of boxes. And we use a barcoding system and there's no barcoding on it. And you think, oh, God, I should have been talking to warehouse in the first place. I should have been engaging with those guys as well. So it's really important in those early stages that we get it right and we engage with the right amount of stakeholders. And there's a lot of things you read about engaging with stakeholders, and it kind of goes over a lot of people's heads. But think about that whole process of what you're going to be buying. Think about who's going to be using it, how are you going to store it, where is that product going to go, and then we can start asking the right questions about that. If you don't have that knowledge, and we quite often don't. A lot of people don't have 20 years buying the same product, and we're not all category managers with that expertise. Where are we going to get that information from? Plan that time in the initial stages to learn about what you're doing. Is that engaging with technicians, with engineers, with the technical people? Is it engaging with your end user? Is it bringing in that expertise from somewhere else, whether it be consultancy or whatever, to get that knowledge? It's really important for me practically. If you can understand what you need at the very beginning by talking to the right people and get the right information, everything else, as you say, will be much easier.
And the demand as well, because the demand is really important. There's no point, buying stuff in that's going to sit in the warehouse for 6 months or 9 months or so.
So we've talked about the early stages, getting it right at the start around there. Then we get into the bit where I find students are a little bit more comfortable with, particularly if they're working in that procurement sourcing type of role, doing the tender situation, regardless of whether they're in the public or the private or the third sector. They're a little bit more comfortable about the stages of going out with the bids, getting bids back, evaluating. And then they tend to get, as they go further around the cycle, after the award into the contract management aspects, they tend to then glaze over a little bit. And this could be, again, as somebody has said, that it's because they don't work in that area. It's somebody out in their business that do. How do we make sure that students don't just turn off at the end of a contract being awarded? How do we get them to understand the importance of contract management and supplier relationship management in those latter stages of the cycle?
I think there's a real shift depending on the type of industry that you work in, to the way that contract management is performed. I think historically, particularly in the public sector, and I don't think I'm going to be naming names or shaming anybody here, that contract management probably didn't have the same emphasis as the way, and it's very difficult because a lot of the end users in public sector are not the same people who are using it, so there is that disconnect. And I know that the Crown Commercial have done a lot of work around building the DNA, and one of these big stages in the DNA of Crown Commercial's procurement structures is this post-contract management, this engagement after the fact. Whereas if we think about industries like the construction industry, this is where I think that these guys are already ahead of the game, and they're already thinking, and they're already thinking about the impact that contract management can have. And if we can instill that in to everybody about what we should be doing, how should we be doing it, and why we do this, I think we'll get the benefits from it. So in the construction industry, they work on fixed priced contracts, so they know they're going to be working on small margins. So most of the bottom line that they're going to be getting is through that after contract award, working with the suppliers, developing those relationships, improving things, making savings. I always think it's a really interesting statement to say the first delivery that you ever have should be the worst delivery that you should ever have. So when we talk about contract management, we should be thinking about that's our starting point. That's the worst anything should ever be. And all we have is an opportunity to work with the supplier to get them better. Whether we talk about continuous improvement programs, whether we talk about setting KPIs, it's about improving that. So when you say, Alison, why do people take their eye off it? I think because it's easy to do that, because it's easy to move on, and we are all busy and our lives are busy, and we move on from one contract to another. But what we have to do is instill that we know who's going to do the contract management, whether it's us or an end user department, and we build that into the process, and we know that we're trying to make things better and not just dot I's and cross T's.
I think, just to add to that, I mean, if I went back to my days when I worked in automotive, it was very difficult to contract manage, particularly when you were at different sites, because we didn't have the luxury of the technology we have today, where we've got share file, where we can share resources at click of a button. It's complete transparency. Our contracts were pretty much in a filing cabinet, and if you weren't at that location, you didn't have it. And you know, you could send it out in the post to the other location that's receiving the goods or you know, receiving the service, and it'd never be managed, and that's a lot to do with it. I think as well, it's about buy-in across the business, that there is the benefits of contract management, and the supplier relationship management element of it. I think the big thing is to sell the benefits, not just the procurement team, but across the business and all the user departments, and the benefit of that. Because I mean, we're seeing a lot of really good things, a lot of social values coming in here, a lot of sustainability and CSR is being captured in this SRM. And actually, I think supply chains today have a much more, as you know, much more collaborative and working together to achieve these, you know, these better outcomes for everybody, really.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, both of you. The last sort of stage, if you get, because we've gone through most and just into the last quadrant, is when things come to an end and when we're starting to think about the options going forward. What types of areas would we normally explain to students happen in this stage when we're doing that review about what's happened and what we should do going forward?
Can I just jump in? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I always let Greg go first. Okay, but this to me is by far, I mean, and I know I said initially there's no most one important stage, but this is so important, and this for me is my passion about project management as well, is because if you don't capture the lessons learned, you will never ever improve, and that can be the lessons learned about the supplier performance, but also about your performance and how you have continuously managed that contract. And actually, one of the big learnings that you find out, if you didn't set the right key performance indicators at the beginning, they're not going to be effective objectives at the end of the contract. So this is so valuable, but as like project management, quite often, the performance is done, put it to bed. But who's learning from that experience? Nobody, if you don't complete that lessons learned. Okay.
It goes back to the point of why we have a structured procurement process. It's why we have these stages, so that when we get to that point, we can look at each stage, were we doing what we were meant to be doing? Have we done it well enough to be able to progress? And a lot of people will talk about having stage gate reviews within the procurement cycle. So unless we've hit a certain target, we can't move on to the next stage, which is, you know, Sue alluded to, like, you can run every procurement like a project, that it's got these stages that you go through and everything's done. Sorry, Alison, I know I just interrupted.
No, you didn't. That was absolutely fine. Thank you. You just hit on the point I always said. I always say to students that every procurement activity that we do is a project. So both of you, yes, I totally agree. If I had to push you just on the final points here about which is your favourite part of the purchasing cycle. So I think your passion maybe came through on the review and the continuous learning side of it. But which would be your favourite part of the purchasing cycle as an end?
Mine 100% would be about the learning new things. So like a lot of people, I just love finding out about stuff. I love knowing what things are. So when we talk about stages, like if you're talking about a generic procurement cycle and you're talking about identifying the need and defining the need, that's when we're going to start doing that market research, finding out what suppliers are, you know, doing our Porter's 5 Forces and our Steeple and all of these kind of things, finding out what's available and who, you know, what are going to be my constraints, what are going to be my enablers in order to get the best thing that I can get. So I love doing market research. I can sit and Google, or I can sit and talk to people all day from finding out new things. So that's, for me, is definitely my favourite stage.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mine is very much towards the end of the procurement cycle. But I mean, I love them all equally, I guess.
They're like the children.
Luckily, I've only got one. So I think, because of my passion for project management, I think the end, the lessons learned, is really, really good. But at the same token, it's that exploring and identifying the need and defining those needs, and the engagement with stakeholders to really get to the nitty gritty. And, you know, I hate to say it, that I like to be the person the computer says no. You know, I like to challenge that need and ask those questions to really get to the nitty gritty. Does it really need to be all singing, all dancing? You know, I want to make that need fit for purpose, essentially.
Yeah, brilliant.
And value, of course, but
let's flip it. Alison, what's your least favourite stage of the procurement cycle?
Oh dear me, I didn't think of that question when I was sorting this one out. I think it's probably around the tender stage, because that's the bit that we all do, you know, that's the bread and butter of a procurement person, you know. So I'm a bit like you too. I like the beginning bit, the getting excited about something new that's come along that you've got to find out about, and even at the end looking back and then planning it for the next time round as to where we're getting back. But the least favourite, I think, is that bottom part of it, doing the day-to-day action side.
Bureaucracy, the paperwork. And,
yeah, exactly.
And actually evaluating the suppliers. I mean, it's all right when you've got, you know, objective data, but when it's subjective, it's really, really difficult. And that's why I suppose you need different departments to get involved. Yeah.
And then you've got conflict management to all the way through. Is that we always I know when we teach negotiation, one of the key bits is how do you do negotiation in the purchasing cycle? And it's every stage. There's aspects for negotiation around that. Well, sorry, Sue.
I was going to say, and that's a whole nother discussion, isn't it? In each stage, you could have a whole session on this in each stage and all the different tools and models and practices and processes that we go through in each.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, thank you very much for your time this morning. And just to wrap up for everybody, what we're saying, and please jump in if I haven't got this right, there's not only one model. You can make your own model up if you look at what you do and you ask questions and you consult with other people within your organisation. So keep an open mind about them. Don't close it. But then when you choose one, stick with it. So you learn that ready if you're doing an examination. I think from Greg's perspective, it's about asking questions, make sure you, and Sue putting the challenge in at the different places to make sure that you're continually learning and then being able to continuously improve at the end of each stage. Is that?
Absolutely, I think that's great.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully speak to everybody soon.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
SR Supply Chain Consultants. Engage, learn, grow. Visit www.srscc.co.uk today.